By this point, you've probably heard of the controversy, or depending on your perspective, the contrived controversy over President Trump's bloodbath comments, where he was clearly referring to trends in the auto industry that if they went a certain way could be negative for Americans. But what the corporate media immediately reported in both headlines and otherwise, him basically trying to imply that he basically meant a bloodbath if he's not elected, in the sense that things would get violent if he's not elected, in the sense that he's calling for political violence. And so this debate has been swirling in the political circles for a while now. Joe Biden, his campaign, used this as an attack line, using the same tired line that was used by the general media when the story first broke, but a lot of people are realizing exactly what President Trump meant, things of that sort.
Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal. Those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. Now, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole... That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
And so I don't intend to relitigate the whole matter. But when I first heard about the story, and as someone who was watching the speech when it was happening, who rewatched the speech that this comment took place in, when I first heard the headlines, my initial thought was not, oh, the media is lying. It's true, the media does lie. They lie a lot, and they lie promiscuously. And their status, which we'll discuss in a second, almost gives them cover to lie, because the trust that people give them, in many cases, is taken for granted. That's starting to go away, thankfully, due to the fact that true media literacy is starting to come about through the decentralization of information and through people beginning to realize that they cannot simply outsource trust to someone else. They have to be able to verify facts for themselves. And this has caused a lot of people in the expert class to panic, because now they have to justify their conclusions as opposed to simply making assertions and having us believe the assertions on good faith and nothing else. You can't have a good society, a moral society, a free society that is based solely off of blind trust and blind faith. There must be trust, but there must also be an element of substantiation, or else the trust is cheap. If you haven't earned trust, then what is my trust worth? It's simple platitude. But that's a different story, different day. But the story here is not that the media is lying or that they took Mr. Trump out of context, which they certainly did. The story here is that there is a culture, a perverse political culture in our country that enables people in the media, that enables liars, that enables propagandists to be able to lie and to, in many cases, get away with it. And this culture is not propped up by shadowy forces hiding in the background that are controlling the strings of our political conversation. No. This culture is propped up by the average, everyday political observer that actively participates in this culture whenever they comment on political matters. And by doing that, they give a foundation for those who wish to do our republic harm, for those who wish to plunge us into the darkness of ignorance, to harm us. What do I mean? Think of how political conversation happens these days in our country and in the West generally. You can blame this on the internet or some other source, but political conversation normally revolves around a set of hot takes, comments that people make that excite the passions, that make you emotional, and these hot takes then drive discussion that is of a similar kind of nature. There's no depth, there's no desire to understand the topic at hand generally. I'm speaking in broad strokes here. For some, there is, but for most people, there's not. There is no desire to actually interact with the material of the topic. There is simply the boilerplate take given about the topic. And so this thing creates a cycle of poorly contrived takes, perspectives, built off of nothing more than mere opinion, that does not come from first principles, that does not come from applying the evidence to logical conclusions. It simply comes from mere opinion. And this creates a culture that is surrounded by mere opinion. Now, many of you may say, well, Christian, are you saying that the rise of opinion commentary in American conversation is a toxin that spoils the mind? I'm not saying that necessarily. In fact, I think that opinion commentary can be good because it is one of the first areas of media to be clearly categorized and defined as what it is. The problem is, you have in a lot of places news, which is meant to be fact-based, masquerading as, or rather commentary, masquerading as news. And you have people who are in the anchor seats, people who are in the writers' rooms of these big corporations, CNN and all these other places, that are quite literally infusing narrative subconsciously into their stories, whether it be overtly or subconsciously, and by doing that, they are actually injecting their opinion in. This is not simply someone commenting on a particular matter with their own thoughts. No, this is the general terms and conversations of our era being infused into news stories and then presented to us as fact. What do I mean? So, for example, the idea of gender identity. That is a very big umbrella that has been embraced by almost every major news organization in America in terms of how they address people with certain pronouns. Whether you agree with this practice or not is really besides my point. My point is a subjective perspective on the human condition, which is gender ideology, and their use of pronouns, which is essential and instrumental to the enactment of the gender ideologues division of the world, is considered objective standard for major news organizations that write the articles that we read and that curate the information that we consume. Doesn't this seem like a problem? Another thing, the AP Style Guide, which is the standard for how news articles are written, that tells news companies to capitalize the word black for some odd reason to give it some significance. Why? It's an infusion of race ideology into the way the news is crafted. These may seem innocuous, but they're not. They only seem innocuous because you and I may have the reference point of when this thing didn't happen, when these kind of things didn't occur, that we can say, okay, them occurring now seems odd. But what happens when someone is raised under these mediocre standards and is raised under this subjectivism masquerading as substantive fact, and that shapes their world? They become someone whose entire existence is influenced by this false constellation of ideas, and thereby they don't have an actual understanding of the world. Why am I talking about all this? Because everything I just mentioned to you can only fly in a civil society if the people are intellectually lazy. Going back to our conversation about hot takes earlier, where political conversation is based on what drives the most clicks, what gets the most engagement, and what is the most sensational, not what is the most truthful, what is the most philosophically sound, what is the most moral. None of that matters. What is the most sensational and what drives engagement and clicks, that's what is centered at the forefront of political conversation. And so in a culture where those are the values, hot takes become the currency of the day. The 60-second soundbite TikTok becomes the currency of the day, even though both hot takes and TikTok both demonstrate, in the case of TikTok explicitly, the diminishing of human ability to comprehend vast ideas because it restricts our attention spans to shorter and shorter formats and thereby makes us used to dealing with shorter and shorter formats, so much so that when you get another generation that's been raised up under this, like Gen Z was raised under it, according to Nicholas Carr's book The Shallows, they can't really interact with the more substantive literature. This culture is an example of that. And when you can't interact with ideas substantively, or you're just not willing to, because the culture that you exist in is not doing it, then you can get news agencies, or anyone else for that matter, manipulating small things that mean something, that convey significance, that under any other standard would have been challenged and would have been critiqued and would have been fought with reason. But when reason is no longer a value, and something else replaces reason as a value, like sensationalism, like hot takes, like clickbait, then you will get a society and a culture built off of those things. There are two primary forces ruling the political conversation today: status and passion. There is a non-insignificant amount of people who are simply passive consumers of news. Ballast, so to speak. They may be very nice people, may be very smart in some areas, but they don't actually get involved in understanding what's going on beyond reading the headlines. Those people would have walked away with the idea that President Trump was calling for political violence. Then there are people that aren't ballasts, but they are not enlightened in terms of how they analyze and read certain news sources. And they rely entirely on the status of the news organization that they're reading to determine the validity of the information they are receiving, not the actual information itself. Those people may have been less susceptible to being deceived, but they still would have probably been deceived by this headline. Then there's a third class of people. These people don't really care about the status of the news corporations anymore because it doesn't really matter to them. These people are more skeptical and more forthright and more willing to actively consume information as opposed to passively doing it. And these people may have seen it as a lie from the very start. What am I saying? What I'm saying is very simple. Most people rely on status, rely on identity of these organizations and their reputation for conveying fact and conveying truth more than they do what these organizations are saying. American civilization is the greatest repudiation to status in human history. American civilization said it doesn't matter what your status is, where you were born, what organization that you rely on, or what family that you come from, but rather what matters is how do you constitute yourself in the face of the universal values of truth and goodwill and those kind of things and justice. How do you constitute yourself in the face of your fellow man? That's what matters. But we've gone away from that mindset and we've gone right back to the society of status, dressed up in big corporate buildings, plastered on with manicured logos, and sat within your presence with dolled up and puffed up and manicured up and dolled up news anchors that can sell you a lie in a sweet way that makes you even that literally disables you from being able to realize that you're being lied to. The society of status is the most dangerous phenomenon to re-enter the American experiment, and it is ruining our ability to have any kind of conversation or to actually understand truth. Barack Obama mentioned that having so much information is a threat to truth, but he was incorrect. Having information gatekeepers is a threat to truth, which is what scares him because he wants the gatekeepers. Different story, different day. But then the passion. The biggest lesson that any of us have to learn is that we have to separate our passions, our emotions, from our ability to entertain ideas. There are maybe some ideas that are so viscerally relational to us that we just want to have an emotional reaction over, that are just so close, near, and dear to our heart. But you have to be willing to treat ideas as they are in the abstract. And then when it comes to actually dealing with them in the concrete reality, narrow those ideas and apply them according to your situation. I can entertain even almost any idea, even those that I think are horrid, because I treat them in the abstract. They do not become me. They are a subject, rather, of my intuitions, my reason, and my ability to deduce things. And then once I am finished with that process, I lay them to the side, I take the good, I leave the bad. That's how this is supposed to work. That's how learning and knowledge is supposed to work. But so many of us want to get angry and attack our political opponents and own the libs and simply score victories, cheap social media victories that actually mean nothing in terms of advancing society, in terms of advancing you, and in terms of restoring our country to its proper order and form. But it feels good to own the libs. It feels good to have social media ratios against people. It feels good to do these things. And in a society like that, liars, frauds, and propagandists can take advantage of this broken culture of unhinged feeling, and they can use it to manipulate you. And they have used it to great effect to manipulate all of us as Americans, whether it be through running a scheme on all of us for the Iraq War, manufacturing consent in the worst way there, whether it be trying to convince the American public that people that speak out against unlawful programs are treasonous and traitors, whether it be trying to convince the public that Russia was collaborating with President Trump when that was absolutely in no way the case, whether it be any of the numerous hoaxes that have come out that have been sanctioned by the corporate gatekeepers. They are only possible in a broken culture of unrestrained passion, and a broken culture where truth is not the value. Listen to me. The media lies, but the culture that produces lying is the much greater culprit than the media. We as Americans, as conservatives, as whatever we want to call ourselves, must embrace the mantle of epistemic humility. And we must begin to advance in this project of restoring our country in a way that leads to healthier conversations, to better thinking, and to better governance, not in a way that leads to endless fighting, both infighting and outfighting, when it is not necessary. Intellectual laziness, which is the dominant currency of our day, enables liars, thieves, propagandists to perfect their craft. Bernays knew this. FDR knew this, which is why he launched the Office of Wartime Propaganda in the 1940s and convinced an entire generation of Americans that if they kept their own hard-earned money in their pocket, they were somehow supporting Hitler. That's what FDR did during World War II. And we just forget about it because, oh, America won. Did we? Did we win? Did we? Because the culture post-1940s versus pre-1940s is almost like a different country. We may have beat Germany, but we lost America in the process of embracing socialism as a means of coping with economic turmoil and social turmoil here at home. Different story, different day. An intellectually and morally assertive citizenry is what is important to cause the classes of frauds and liars to fail, and cause the virtues of Americanism to succeed. It's my sincere belief, my friends, that we need a revolution of the mind, and we will only get it when we demand more from ourselves and our fellow interlocutors. So please do just that, and be sure to keep your eye on the prize. The prize is America. It is not some short-term win against some anonymous Twitter account. My friends, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Be sure also, if you appreciated my video, you can donate if you want to, PayPal, Patreon, all the good stuff as well. It's all in the comment section down below. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.